Are you ready to uncover hidden messages from your body, to tap into the power of your heart's wisdom? Dr. Jason Loken joins us to explore the importance of connecting our body, our intuition, and our consciousness for healing and living a more fulfilling life. Stay tuned for a deeper understanding of healing and transformation.
Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Linda Lang.
Hi, this is Linda Lang from ThoughtChange.com. We are exploring the mystical side of life once again. If you enjoy our conversations, remember to subscribe, share with a friend. Today, I have Dr. Jason Loken with me. Jason is a naturopathic doctor and the host of Inspire Health podcast. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, Linda. Thanks so much for having me on the show today.
Jason, how long have you been working in the alternative health field?
Probably a little over 25 years now. So I've been a naturopathic doctor I graduated back in 2002. I actually wanted to be a physiotherapist. And what happened was when I was in school and I was doing a lot of long distance running, I'd kind of wrecked my back and I went in to see the physios. And I was mostly just kind of got like some TENS units on my back. And I kind of sat there for a while, a little bit of stretching. And I was like, I think I'll get really bored if this is what I'm going to be doing all the time. And then I had a good friend of mine who had just been in his second year of massage therapy school, came and worked on me, and it made a big difference. And so I went kind of a career shift, and I left that program and went right over and did the massage therapy program. And while I was doing the massage therapy program, I ended up seeing a naturopathic doctor that completely transformed played a role in sort of awakening that healing capacity within me to heal from a lifetime of really chronic allergies and anaphylaxis and asthma and all this sort of stuff. And so that really was the catalyst to go into naturopathic medicine. And then from there, I got introduced into osteopathy. So once I finished that, then I started osteopathy and did that program. And so I kind of blend all of those worlds together now. But yeah, overall, probably about 25 years or so.
So you must have a pretty good handle in the ways that our body communicates with us.
Yeah, and it's changed lots over the years. I think working with people and at the same point working with yourself, you start to become actually realize how important the body is. And I think even Western medicine is getting more and more aware of just how important the body is and how it communicates with us.
Some people have actually come out and said that the body is the unconscious mind. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I remember Candace Pert from Molecules of Emotion even talking about that. Every time we have a thought, we create a certain amount of neurochemistry. And if that neurochemistry is not being processed, which usually involves us actually staying long enough to feel it without re-exciting the same process again, that neurochemistry tends to get stored in the body, physically in the body. So she would actually say that our body is literally like our subconscious mind is our body. It's not somewhere up here. It's all over. So I would say absolutely. And it's tricky because we're also in this sort of way of the world where we accumulate so much and we don't really even create space to be able to deal with it properly. This is often why I feel like so many people just end up in states of like overwhelm and they don't know what they're feeling. It's almost like numb or rage or just complete overwhelm and almost nothing in between, because when something triggers, it's not just that one thing now, it's that entire cauldron filled with neurochemistry and emotions that all now comes up to the surface, and it can be totally overwhelming. And then it gets actually hard to discern what the messages are that are coming from the body.
I think the one thing I would caution about thinking the body as the unconscious mind is that it can open a doorway to judgment when we see people who have, chronic conditions, health conditions, overweight, thin, healthy looking people can have baggage too, right?
I think everybody has baggage. And even when things like judgment comes up, right? To me, whenever I catch myself when I'm judging, because so much of that stuff is almost unconscious as well, because it's all tied in with our cultural and society and upbringing and all these different things. most of that's kind of unconscious, is that when we catch ourselves doing it, then try to make it conscious so that we don't keep doing it, or catch where it's coming from. It's always an opportunity to kind of clear out more of ultimately what is not us so that we can make room to connect more back in with what truly is us. I think at the heart of it, that's what we're always trying to do as we kind of move along.
So I'm someone who believes that your body is always talking to you. We just have to learn how to listen, right?
Yeah, that was literally a tagline in one of the books I wrote called Understanding to Knowing. And it was around the ideas of that our body's always giving us messages. We just need to learn how to listen to them.
And release that idea of controlling, I think, too, right?
And controlling so tied with fear of the unknown, right? And as soon as we start to get fearful of what's because we're here and everything's kind of a bit of a surprise. And as much as we enjoy the fun surprises, we also have a lot of fear around what we don't know is going to happen, and so that triggers that controlling. And so I remember one of the teachers I used to see before, Pema Chodron, she would say, we need to eventually become okay with having the rug swept up from underneath us. That sort of idea that we can be okay even when we're sort of in limbo.
And there are some people who really thrive in that not knowingness. So it's possible.
Absolutely. I think that's where the magic really happens, because when you are there, and if you're not, you haven't created a certain conclusion and you're not in a total fearful state, you're kind of in the spontaneity of the moment to allow whatever is going to surface through our own source connection to actually surface. And that's usually where we get the most profound guidance, I think.
And those messages that come through our body, they can be promoting the highest good, let's say, or they can be trying to steer us away or let us know there's an issue, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think those are the ones that the more that we spend time connecting to the body, discerning the different messages that are coming in, I think we're able to start to tease apart what the message is telling us to do. I remember probably over a decade ago, I was working with a patient and my entire left arm just kind of fell asleep and went numb. And then that just started to happen. Then I get a lot of deep aching around the shoulder and stuff. And so I went and got massage and osteopathy and chiropractic and all the things that physically should have really taken care of it. I wasn't really doing anything. And it had been going on then for probably about close to 3 months. And I was doing lots of work and it still wasn't getting better. And then I finally saw a friend of mine that does similar work to what I do. And he was testing me in a lot of other ways and checking for muscle imbalances, but then also tied the muscle that was imbalanced with the conflict that was unresolved. And for me at the time, he goes, how is the feeling of over responsibility playing into your life? And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, just got engaged, just bought a house, just moved in with my fiance and my new 7-year-old stepson, just changed locations of my clinic, like check, 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 check. And all it took was the awareness of that. And then within about 2 weeks after that, everything just started to kind of fall in place. So it's almost like it would have been a disservice if chiropractic and massage and things got rid of it without me getting the deeper underlying message, because who knows what that would have played into if it wasn't brought to my immediate awareness and then resolved. And it didn't even require a lot of work per se. It was just the recognition of that taking place that sort of then sat in me and then changed the way that I was just doing things kind of unconsciously.
So, what kind of messages should we really be paying attention to?
I think they can be almost anything under the sun, but I would look at the ones that are showing up for you at this time. So whether that is when you get joint pains or joint aches, whether you get strong fatigue, whether you get headaches, whether you get certain digestive problems that literally you are not digesting well or not stomaching, all of these things can be messages. And I would see it over and over again. Like one patient I would see who had really crippling rheumatoid arthritis, and she came in, and then some days it was like gone and other days it was really bad. And so usually we're looking for physical stuff like diet, and a lot of times those things can play into it. But then I asked her what it felt like in her body. And this would be a question I would have people ask themselves when you're feeling something, whatever it is, whatever your ailment is, really narrow down what the sensation is like for you. And so for her, I said, what does it feel like? She goes, I feel like I'm restricted, like I'm constrained. I feel like I'm in a cage, like I'm trapped in my body. And then I asked her, where else in her life is she feeling those same sensations? And then the tears came up, and for her, it was very much tied to her immediate relationship with her husband. And then she started to pair that whenever she was in certain dynamics with him, her joints would completely swell up. And that when he was away on a business trip or something along those lines, she was doing much, much better. And so it sometimes can be that immediate and that intense. And the body will sometimes be very intense when it's really trying to get our attention.
It's almost like it's showing us all the stuff we don't want to look at or deal with.
I think very much, yeah. And the body is not going to really lie to you. I think sometimes our interpretations we will rationalize. We just have to be really honest with ourselves as best as we can. And I think that's an ever evolving process too, as we know more and as we're able to actually honestly look at what's coming up. Because sometimes if you're not really in a place where you're ready to maybe make certain changes that your body is bringing awareness to you, you won't get the message because you're not really in a place where you're actually going to do something with it that maybe needs to be done. So that's where I think we run into a bit of a brick wall with it at times. But if we're open to just even letting it in, and then from that awareness, even if it's like, okay, wow, that's related to my partner. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave. Maybe that might be one of the infinite possibilities, but there could be a lot of different ones. But if you're at least you are being very clear with what's going on, and you usually know if you can slow things down enough and get out of here and get more into here to ask yourself, you'll get a different answer if you can get more into your heart space and be able to ask the same question. That's where I will usually do my discerning. If I feel like I'm too intellectual around it, I need to get out of that and ask myself from a place of more intuitive knowing. And from that place, I usually get a very different answer, and I don't second guess it.
So where do you think these messages actually originate from?
That's a good question. One thing that I have definitely come to understand over the years is that what we perceive as our reality is infinitesimal. It's a tiny, tiny little blip in the absolute reality of what is actually influencing us. I feel like we are constantly being influenced by, even if you just look at the physical range of, say, electromagnetic spectrums, what our five senses are able to pick up on is a very, very narrow bandwidth of this totality. So, X-rays affect us and gamma rays and EMF and all these things, but we don't see it. We don't even really feel it per se, other than some people that are very, very sensitive to it. But a lot of times that stuff's there, but it falls outside of what our perceived reality is. But we kind of think everything that's real is only what we perceive through the five senses. And so when you get outside of the physical reality, now you're getting into like vital bodies and emotional bodies and mental bodies and spiritual bodies and all these different aspects that are ultimately interacting with us. So I think we are actually bombarded by a lot of different information. When it comes to us getting into our heart's knowing, I ultimately think we are connecting directly to our higher self, that part of source that we are, and then we're getting very true information. So to me, that's what we are designed to take instructions from. And if we're taking instructions from anything other than that, I think we're setting up a blueprint for ill health.
Let's consider for a moment our higher self always communicating with us either not understanding the messages or ignoring the messages because they don't make sense, or we have an attachment to the way things are, the way things should be. And then all of that energy gets stuck in our energy field and eventually in our physical body. Can this energy get actually processed through the physical body, or do we really need to clear it on all these other levels?
I think that it shows up in the physical body, and I think if you are only addressing things from the physical body, I think that ultimately you're going to keep running into the same problem. It's sort of like when someone wants to work with weight, for example. Maybe they're overweight, and they focus on their behaviors and their actions. And those are actually the weakest determinant to transformation out of everything. It's a very limited field. So you might be able to push yourself through to get some change, but inevitably, if you're not changing the blueprint higher up, it's not going to be long-lived, and it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of willpower to try to make that happen. What I generally find is that when we want to make any significant changes, we have to go to these larger, more powerful fields of consciousness where ultimately we have more possibilities available to us. If you're kind of stuck in a way of looking at the world from here, you're kind of only privy to those possibilities. You have to be able to expand into something larger that has more possibilities available to you.
What do you think about those type of almost dictionaries like Louise Hay's, You Can Heal Your Life, where they take a symptom and give you a reason why you might have that symptom?
I think some of that stuff is a good starting point for people, especially if they're not used to even questioning that stuff. There might be some aha moments that come up for people. But I still find it's still pretty individual. I don't think there's one cookie cutter way for everybody, but there might be more nuances in that opens up the door for you to start to do some more self-reflection as you start to go through the process. I mean, every time you even show up to start to address it or look at it or become curious about it, you're opening yourself up to something new to happen. An area of medicine that I do really like is called biological decoding, which is kind of based off of New German medicine. And I found that there's a lot of stuff in there that can really narrow down an unresolved conflict that's very much related to a specific area. I don't necessarily find that's all the time, but sometimes that can be a really helpful process for people to even, if they're ready to kind of even look at like, okay, maybe there's more than just, that I hurt my shoulder and it's not getting better and I've got inflammation. I don't know why. And you sort of start to explore it. If you're in a place where you're ready to look at it wholly and let it into your life, I think there's so much healing that can take place from that. And you'll kind of discern which parts really fit for you if you allow it to sift through.
Struck me as you were talking about where the messages come from. Perhaps everything is a metaphysical level or a spiritual level, if you like that term better.
I use them kind of almost interchangeably. I think we're in a place now that's interesting because I think we are bridging science and spirituality. And to me, that's kind of what metaphysics is. I think it's just what is usually tangibly known, but we haven't been able to explain it in the way that our brain likes to try to understand it. And a lot of times that's because either people aren't open to even exploring it or the technology is not available to be able to really understand it wholeheartedly. But I would say the metaphysics is where I think healing really takes place, which is essentially going into the realms outside of the perceived five senses of our reality and then working with those, or from a state of consciousness, right? Sometimes people can understand it better from a state of consciousness. Consciousness is like a field, essentially, and it's also an attractor field. So if I am in a field of, say, fear, then I see a fearful world. Everything doesn't matter. So even if I was going to go on a vacation, my perception would be viewing all of the worries that might happen on that vacation. If I was in a field of enthusiasm, I would just be very excited about the vacation. And so I'm going to have a very different experience depending on what my state of consciousness is. And that's where also we open up the field to more possibilities that exist within that space. So that's why if you really want to create change, we have to work on that level because that opens us up to something different. And if we keep running our lives through that same field of consciousness, you've only kind of got so much access because that's where your attention is all the time. Your attention is on only this stuff. If you can catapult out of that, and a lot of times that happens when we have tangible experiences. We're in a real era now where information is not enough. You can't have information here. You have to have a tangible knowing of it inside yourself. So we need to be able to move from just intellectually understanding it to putting it into practice and feeling it in our bodies. And then we have a different sense of ownership of it to some point because we really know it. And we can't be so shaken when it's just sort of an intellectual understanding, I would say.
And how do we do that, Jason? How do we do that?
I think it's a lifelong process, but to me, so much of it starts with slowing things right down. I think we all have to find space for stillness, because otherwise I think all we're really identifying with is the false sense of identifications and false perceptions that we've been brought up with. So even who we think we are is ultimately probably mostly false. And the only way we really get to know who we truly are is through experience of connecting to it. So to me, I find I'm most connected to that when I take time in nature, when I'm sitting and being quiet and just still. And then you start to actually get out of the restlessness after a while, because you start to get familiar with it, and then you look forward to it. It's like going home. It's just this really beautiful place. And then I find when I'm doing that, even my interactions with my family and with my kids and with the world around me is very different. I'm more grounded in who I really am. And from that place, I think we're just more powerful too. This is where we want to be able to ultimately create change in our life, is from that place, not from all of this false sense of who we think we are. So stillness and getting back to the essence of who we really are. And then from that place, what happens is then our own personal instructions will surface spontaneously. For me, they'll be different. For Linda, they're going to be different. For anybody listening, they're going to be different, but you will know it because you will get a sense of knowing and inspiration that usually arises inside yourself. And then that's what you want to listen to, right? And even when you hear other stuff outside that resonates with you, run it through that place too, to see where it lands for you specifically.
I think maybe the very first step is to have a willingness, or perhaps even just curiosity about what's possible. That's enough to open that door and allow a shift to happen.
You know, one of my favorite teachers was Dr. David Hawkins, and he wrote a book called Power versus Force, and we used to go to his lectures out in Arizona pretty regularly. And he said the most important fields that you want to be able to get to, courage is the first one, and that's at the level 200. That is when you start to more move towards positive life direction. And so we need courage, and I would say courage just to show up, and then from that place, then we can expand into, like you said, willingness and curiosity, I think, then happen. But that's the first level. So that's actually the most important level for positive change on the planet, because it starts within us. And when we hit that level of courage, we're not operating then from pride or anger or fear or guilt or shame or any of these other things that are not necessarily, they're not bad emotions, but they're weak attractor fields, and they're not very powerful to create big change in our lives.
Talk to me a little bit about expectation.
I think generally expectation causes troubles because expectation inherent in it is attachment. And when you've attached yourself to anything, you have essentially created a conclusion. And as soon as you've created a conclusion, you've now limited yourself to all of the different ways that that conclusion or anything else even better than that could actually take place. So what's a really, really tricky thing for, I think, human beings is to have a strong sense of desire of what our heart is really telling us. And first, that means not our ego mind identity desires, but our heart's desires. So first we have to kind of do what we were talking about before, like really get to know ourselves. But then let that guide and have a really strong, inspired sense of what you're wanting to move towards or create in the world. But then can you do that without having any expectations of it actually taking place? And that's a really tricky thing. It means you have to be literally in the moment. And if you're in the moment, then you're constantly steering the ship the whole way, rather than trying to keep it on one course that you only think is the only way to make it happen. So I think strong desire, but do everything you can to keep letting go of over and over again of the attachment to a specific expectation, because now you will limit all of the other magical ways that can happen. We talked about this once as sort of in a joking way in a book we wrote called Letters That Move the World, Intentional Acts of Gratitude. And we were talking about sort of this law of attraction should be more like law of intention. and being very clear with what we're wanting and why and this sort of thing. It's the idea where if someone gets very expectation that say they want to have $1 million and, you know, someone comes and gives them a bag of diamonds, they're like, no, I'm holding out for the cash. You know, it's sort of this idea like if you've got it locked down to one thing, you're going to miss out on all of these other amazing ways that things could take place for you.
It reminds me of the manifestation process where you make a list of everything you want, all the qualities you want, let's say in a relationship or in a house you want to buy, whatever the topic is. Before I met my husband, I just put out to the universe, I wanted a boyfriend with an easy last name. That's it. That's all I asked for. And the universe picked better for me than I could have if I, had a very detailed list. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think what we know this tiny little piece of this bigger puzzle. So I kind of leave it in the hands of an energy that I think has a much larger perspective than I do. And ultimately, I think has a better idea of what's in my highest good than what I do if I'm operating from that, limited sense of that ego mind identity. So I think in that process, you're surrendering it over. And in that process of surrender is an incredibly powerful field of transformation to be able to be in. So, and you probably had a feeling inside yourself of what you wanted. Maybe if you didn't paint the exact picture and jot all down and they need to have, 6 feet tall and dark hair and blue or whatever, blah, blah, blah. You had a sensation probably in your body of what you were ready to let in. Then you surrendered over and then that's what shows up.
Jason, I really appreciate the fact that you are stepping beyond just the physical body and functional medicine to bring healing to your patients and to the world through the work that you do. So thank you for remembering the spirit, the emotions, the mind, the whole kit and caboodle that we are.
Absolutely. Oh, you're welcome, Linda. And it's a process, it's like I really think more and more people will grasp we're moving away from just a purely physical world. It's limited. It has its place. We need to care for the physicality, but it's ultimately, I think, primarily dictated by a lot of other more powerful fields of consciousness that play into it. And so we're kind of getting to know ourselves on all of these larger levels, which I think is a real blessing.
And great fun, too.
Yeah, it's a huge adventure.
That's for sure. Jason, if anyone would like to know more information, how can they find you?
Yeah, the best place would be go to inspirehealthpodcast.com. That's kind of got all of our stuff. If you want to work with me, you can click a link there. You can also see all of the different episodes we're doing. My wife and I often interview people together, and we're really having a lot of fun interviewing these guests. It's just amazing. But you'll see a whole bunch of different series, so you can kind of see where you'd like to jump in. And there's a free download on there. I think, Linda, I'm not sure. I think you might have something on the same lines, but it's so important to get out of your head and get into that heart space. It's shifting gears. It's like the intellect is fine if you're operating in a certain lower frequency bandwidth, but it's limited. If we can move to a different frequency and connect to the intuitive knowing that we often associate with the heart, there's a different level of knowing that you experience. And so we created a meditation and a PDF that kind of walks you through the process, and then a meditation where you can sit and really access your heart's wisdom. And I think right now, when people get confused or overwhelmed or have troubles making decisions, do this process and see what your answer is. Sometimes I'll ask myself if I'm in a bit of a stress state, and then I'll ask myself when I go back into that state, and you will get a different answer most of the time. And so you can just go to the Inspiral Podcast homepage and just scroll down and you'll see a link there where you can do that as a free download.
Thank you for being my guest.
My pleasure, Linda. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you for listening to this week's edition of Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. You will find all of our conversations on YouTube, Apple Podcast, on Spotify. Come visit me at thoughtchange.com, pick up your copy of Learning to Listen, and start your own inner exploration. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next time. Bye for now.